let's do attempt to draw a bit of a graph. For those who have a rough idea that the Kochs and others have been involved in creating this machinery to generate thought, to generate ideas, all of them understand that ideas really are the real money, if you want to put it that way. That is the trading element of power in America. And you can say it started back with Lewis Powell. He didn't like what was happening with professors. He didn't like what was happening out on the streets with Vietnam. Or, you can say that it started back with the Republicans taking a sharp right turn and deciding on the Southern strategy and learning that bit of messaging about, the N-word. Where do you consider what we are in now, the post-Citizens United era? Where do you put a starting point?
Well, I agree that, and I think if you want to say something positive about this movement on the right and the Kochs, is you have to give them credit for taking ideas seriously. They actually believed it was worth investing in this whole ideological machine that they built up, and not just in elections, but in this machine. So you could go back to, I guess, when Goldwater lost, there were a number of disappointed far-right conservatives who began, including Richard Mellon Scaife, to sort of get together and think, how do we get back the republic? That's when the very beginning of it happens. But when the big sort of counter-movement gets going is you've got, this is, in the way that I understand it, is that what you've got now is in many ways a reaction against what happened in the late 60s and the 70s. There was the anti-Vietnam War movement, and there was Ralph Nader, who was pushing back against corporations and saying that they were irresponsible. And there was the beginning of the environmental movement, which was beginning to crack down on all kinds of corporate pollution. What you're seeing in a reaction to that whole sort of public citizen activism, and a lot of it was anti-corporate, was that the corporate money got poured into counterbalancing it. And the activists on the right linked up with the corporate money and started to fund sort of an organization, a machine of alternative facts. They said, we are going to fight the universities, which is where the elite opinion is formed. We're going to fight the media. Places like the New York Times that viewed themselves as neutral were suddenly under attack for being liberal from this, right-wing movement. The interesting thing about Lewis Powell's memo that you talked about, which was in 1971, and he was a lawyer who was working for the tobacco industry, among others, and so he was right there where the corporations were being fought because tobacco was under assault. His memo says, don't think that it's like the kids out in the street, the anti-war movement, that's the enemy. The enemy, he says, is elite opinion, and that's what we've got to change. And he's talking about universities, the media, preachers in the pulpits. They are going to change the sort of the machinery that spews opinion and change public opinion in the country. And so that's what they aim for in a big way. And the Kochs and several of the other really, really big right-wing corporate fortunes get harnessed behind this and basically bankroll this movement.
Of all the people that you cover, and you do mention that their family stories and their evolution as political beings are very different one to another, but there's a through line with most of them where no matter how much money you have, it's not enough money.
Right.
And that's why all the protective coloration, that's why we're going to talk about, keeping religion in the schools, that kind of thing. Primarily, it's a front for people who have money to get more money. Was that Lewis Powell's point of view? Because he seems to me to be more ideologically motivated than money motivated.
Well, I think, he was somebody who thought that business, corporate life in America was the lifeblood of America. And that you have to understand they felt threatened. One of the families I write about are the Olin family. And they had a huge chemical company, and they felt that they were good citizens. But suddenly, after the environmental movement, they were under assault for having created toxic waste dumps and really poisoned a whole town down in Virginia. So, I mean, they felt that they were upstanding and that they were being tarred unfairly. So you're asking, was it about ideology or greed? It's kind of a combination of both, I think. Because the ideology that the Kochs have is really an ideology of self-interest. It's kind of like Ayn Randian. They believe that, when people can free up their inner greed, they're better off.
And to look at the family dynamics amongst the Kochs, there's such a textbook case of enough never being enough. And you talk about the scene where 3 of the brothers, because there were 4 Koch brothers, not just the 2 that we all know about, of the 4 Koch brothers, one of them was gay. Everyone had just inherited passels of money and would never have to worry about cash again. Their, descendants through the next 5 generations would never have to worry about money again. But the 3 straight guys tried to blackmail the gay guy to get more money. That's just dazzling, to put a word on it.
That was just such a shocking scene to me. And Charles Koch, who's really the leader of the sort of political activism in that family, and a friend had gotten into the apartment in Greenwich Village of the brother that they thought was gay so that they could snoop around. They'd talk the superintendent of the building into letting them snoop around, and then gathered up information with which they felt they could sort of trick him into a meeting and confront him. And the 3 brothers sort of arranged their chairs like a kangaroo court, and they confronted the 4th brother and basically said, if you don't turn over your shares in this family company to us, we're going to tell Dad you're gay, and it's going to kill him. And he'll certainly disinherit you. And, this was back in the days when it was, considered something that was almost unsurvivable to be yanked out of the closet like that. But to his credit, Freddie Koch, he's the oldest of the boys, stood up and said, I don't want to ever hear about this again, and walked out of the room. He wasn't treated the same way by the father, though, in terms of inheritance. It was his share was handled differently, and I think less. It's hard to know all the details, but just the fact that they did that to their own brother gives you a sense that this is. You talked about dynasty. It really was. It's kind of amazing. I mean, you might have to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist even to understand what money means to these families. And I think, given that they've all got hundreds of millions, if not billions, it has to mean something other than just whether you can, pay for the groceries. It's like, how successful am I? How do I stack up next to other people? How much do my parents love me? Do they give me as much as the other kid? I think it would be really interesting to have a psychiatric kind of account of these families. I'm not capable of doing it. I'm just a reporter, but the dynamics are really wild.
Well, I was actually grateful for some of the background information. I didn't think it was possible for me to feel sorry for any of the larger-than-life characters here, but when you think about the father of the Kochs and what he experienced in the era of Stalin, you can almost say, okay, I understand why he wanted to bring up his sons with a hatred and a distrust of government. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm glad, because I'm trying not to make this into some kind of partisan ideological propaganda or cartoon or anything else. I mean, it really is a complicated story about real people. And so what happened was Fred Koch, the father, who really founded the family fortune, had worked for Stalin and made quite a lot of money off of Stalin, but got to know engineers in the Soviet Union who were killed by Stalin and saw firsthand how people were being disappeared. And he was horrified, as anybody would be, and came back to the United States and harbored just a hatred of central government coming out of that. And he became a founding member of the John Birch Society. But what is interesting to me was he transferred that hatred of central government into a hatred of the United States central government, which he regarded sort of big government and social programs and anything that came out of the New Deal and after that, the Great Society, as sort of creeping communism. So, I mean, I might argue that he overreacted, but that is how the impetus was. He didn't want to see America become like Stalin's Soviet Union.